All right, so warm-ups. So warming our bodies up is very important. This was something I did not practice what I preached for a really long time in the beginning of my derby career. I was always like, oh yeah, people should warm up. But since coming out of retirement, both because my body is older than it was when I first started roller derby, I've had a lot more injuries over the course of my derby career, but also I just recognize the benefit of, like, you need to tell your body what you want it to do, and so it can do it, right? Because otherwise your body's going to be warming up while you're practicing, and that actually hinders your practice. It increases your likelihood of injury, right? I think I'm probably preaching to the choir, but some people are very anti-warm-up to like talk them into it. So this is a modified version of the warm-up that we would do at boot camp, right? So this was the while rolling section. But I just wanted to kind of go through why we would do these, and also just to refresh your memory that this is the warm-up that we'll do before we skate. So obviously we won't be skating laps. You'll just kind of be doing them back and forth in whatever space you have. So just kind of envision yourself. You only need a couple feet to be able to do some of these things, right? And then turn around and go back and do them again. But the reason that we do these specific warm-ups is because these mimic what we are asking our body to do in practice, right? So squats, lunges, toy soldiers, skater pushes, jogging grapevines, and the drunken crossovers. Like, these are basically like mini derby movements or mini skating movements, right? Some of them are more exaggerated than the actual skating movement, but we're warming up those muscle groups so that when it comes to like you asking your body to do that at speed or to do it like in a very crisp and clean way, it's going to be warm and ready to go. So there is method to the madness. We don't just like make you do squats and things for no reason. So yeah, so these will be the rolling warm-ups, and then we'll do these stationary warm-ups, right? So this would be the come into the middle type of warm-up. Oh, that's cool. I just learned something new about Zoom. Woo, it does a cool thing. All right. So again, we're asking you to warm up these specific, oh my gosh, Baxter, stop. The dog's licking his foot. These specific movements, because you're warming up the specific muscle groups that you are going to be engaging. These are more specific to derby, but even for park skating, right, we use our upper body a lot. And even though we may not be like bracing another human or doing quite so much with our upper body, it's still important because you're going to be using your arms, right? And you don't want to like accidentally tweak a muscle like in your shoulder or something because you didn't do your windmills. That was totally avoidable because that shit hurts. So yeah, so windmills, the arm swings, or, you know, these ones, we do our little neck stretches or shrugs. The upper torso is where we're moving our shoulders, right? The lower torso is when we're doing like a hula hoop type motion. And then the knee circles is when we would like put our hands on our knees and we're trying to like almost do like the windshield wiper movement, right? To get your knees to rotate. And then warming up your ankles is obviously very important. Any questions about warm-ups or why we do warm-ups? Okay. This is not news to either of you, I know that. All right, so good stance, man, can change your life. So breaking down posture. So typically, right, when we talk about posture, we always say we want to be as close to like a seated position, like a 90-degree as we can for derby stance, with the understanding that that's not entirely sustainable, right? We don't expect you to be in like a 90-degree angle the whole time. The goal of this is more just so that you can program your brain and your body to easily like default to that. So that's like you getting low. It's brace for impact, right? That's where you should be when you throw your stops. Like all of these things, it's almost like a neutral zone. You want to teach yourself to be able to come back to your neutral zone, even though you won't be there while you're obviously like engaged in action most of the time. But if you are comfortable and you can develop those muscle groups to be able to default back to that, you're going to be a way stronger, way more stable, and way less injured skater, because the majority of derby injuries I see are from skaters that stand straight up across the board, right? So whether that is from them tripping over their own feet and not being stable, whether that's from other skaters hitting them, them not being ready to like receive a hit or receive any, you know, like their own teammate even like trying to take a whip off them or push them or whatever, right? You're not ready for action when you're standing straight up. Nobody is. And even though we have some very talented skaters that their neutral zone is quite a bit higher than that sort of traditional 90-degree derby stance, and that's okay. I would still encourage you guys to try to work on your own neutral zone that's as close to that low, slow, stable, and wide stance as you feel comfortable, because you are going to be a much happier, much more solid skater if that's the posture that you default to. So the way you do that, right, is we've talked about like the whole like putting your seatbelt on. So you want your hips to be under you. So just like we're all sitting right now, right? So we're at a 90-degree. You're sitting on your butt. So your hips are naturally under you, right? Like they're kind of jutted forwards, because otherwise like you can't sit. I always like to call it porno butt, right? But it's like you can't sit if your butt is popped. Like we don't sit like that with our back arched, right? Like we sit like this on like the base of our butt, right? So like imagine like you're sat on your tailbone. If you were like popped up, like that's not comfortable, right? You can even like practice it like, ugh, there's like a weird arch in my back and it doesn't work. So it's not comfortable. It doesn't feel good. Now imagine trying to skate 100 laps like that. It sucks. And like a lot of us do this without even thinking about it, because derby stance is not natural, right? And so we try to force it, and we force it by popping our butt for some reason. I don't know why. We all do it. Like, or a lot of people do it. I did it for a really long time and it wrecked my back. And I was always like, why is my back on fire? And everyone else is just like, la-di-da, I can skate all these laps and it doesn't bother me. Well, that's why. So if at any point you feel like my back's on fire, like my legs are tensing, because you'll notice, right, like our back, whatever is going on in our back affects our hips, which affects like everything that's going on in our legs, right? So if your back's on fire, typically your knees are going to hurt, like your hips are going to feel locked up. You're way less stable and agile. And so everything's going to start to hurt lower down. So if you're feeling any kind of pain in your body, check your stance. Check where your hips are, like first and foremost. And the easiest way for me to remember that was the seatbelt. So like if I was like, okay, can I put my seatbelt on? No, because my butt's popped, right? So it was like I have to pull my butt, like my hips need to tuck under me in order for me to be able to put my seatbelt on. So that was the image that helped me to remember to sit. Like sit like you're sitting in a seat. Don't pop like a porn star. People behind you might appreciate it, but your back doesn't. So yeah. And as I said, like you don't want to be locked. You don't want to be rigid in your derby stance, but you know, you want some flex in your knees always. And if you're feeling kind of locked in, like you're probably locked in your hips, and that's what's happening. So most everything centers on your hips. If your hips are popped, other weird things are going to start to happen. Questions about derby stance?
So when you're like if you're not on skates and you're doing a squat, you're pushing your backside out to counterbalance as your knees are bending. But as long as you keep your back straight, is that still the kind of derby stance, or is that something different?
Nope, that's perfect. Yeah, so you're right. Like squat position, you do tend to like pop just a touch, right? And I think that's natural because you're getting lower. And I think you'll notice that you do it in derby stance too. So if you get that low, like an actual full squat, your butt will pop. But we don't ask you to skate there because that's not realistic, right? Like you can't skate from a squat position. But if you imagine like the top of your squat, and your back is straight, your butt is, your hips are more tucked under you like a seated position, right? So yeah, so absolutely. If you do get lower, totally fine to pop a little bit because you're offsetting your weight distribution. But yeah, not super realistic for derby. But if you're practicing off skates, as long as you're maintaining that like shoulders back and you can still put your seatbelt on, like back straight, you're golden. You're targeting the right muscle groups.
Okay, thank you.
And a good way to do that without having to think about it too much is a wall sit, right? Like that was something that I would throw into my like off skates workouts a lot, because I found that my posture wasn't great for squats. Like I've tried to do some work on this because I love squats, but a wall sit is by far the best because you have the wall that's keeping your butt flush, right? And if you feel any, like, sometimes you can kind of feel where the variation is, right? You're like, oh, there's like a gap this big between my back and the wall, so I need to flush that out by like, you know, like pulling my hips forwards. And it helps you to correct some of that without having to like do much of anything other than a wall sit. Sorry, 1 second. Needy dogs. So yeah, so squats are good, wall sits are good for working on your posture and helping you really like hone in on your derby stance. Again, I'm not advocating that you live in a derby stance. That used to be like the old school way of thinking, right? You should be in derby stance all the time. But now I very much just like to preach, like it should just be where you come back to. It should be sort of like your baseline, your safe place, like where you live when you're not doing everything else, which will actually be a very small fraction of a derby game or a derby practice, right? Because you're always doing other things. But yeah, it just makes you like a much more thoughtful, much more challenging opponent. Like skaters that default back to derby stance are almost impossible to knock down or to like own their space, right? Because they're so much more stable and fluid versus skaters that default to standing up straight, which we all do occasionally. I'm guilty. There's way too many pictures of me standing upright. We do it when we get tired. But again, this is where like training your body to try to come back nice and low. It'll be your best friend once we get back to contact. Because people, sneaky bitches like me, can't come and just like lay you out if you're low, right? It's much more difficult to take someone off guard. So as far as posture for outdoor skating, whether it be trail skating or park skating, you're definitely going to stand a little bit taller, right? Like we don't expect you to have derby stance when you're just like leisurely skating. But I will say, I feel like the difference for form, like transitioning from a derby style stance to an outdoor stance, but that so that you will get some benefit from the outdoor skating for derby specifically, is if you engage your core. So rather than just leisurely, like, and again, we're all guilty, I do it all the time, just leisurely skating outside and you're kind of just like, I'm free and I'm standing upright and it feels great. That's all good. But if you are wanting that, like all that energy that you're exerting to sort of help tie back into your derby stance and like your derby muscle groups, if you just engage your core and have a little bit of flex in your knees, you can stand pretty much upright. You want flex for if you do hit something, you do need to stumble, right? So like if you roll over a rock, if there's an unexpected person coming at you or coming up from behind you and you need to like jump out of the way or stop suddenly or whatever, you're going to be much happier if you have some flex in your knees to be able to jump and dodge and stop and do what you need to do. And then, yeah, just the simple act of like engaging right here means that you're still building core muscles, which is like at the heart of your derby stance, right? And at the heart of derby in general. Everything we do in derby engages our core. That's why it hurts so bad. So if you're outdoor skating, just on the trail, through town, whatever, like actively engage that core, and all of that is going to be adding to your, you know, your endurance and your fitness level for derby.